So if you're dealing with anxiety, ADHD, issues with attention, mood swings, or struggles with socializing and depression, stick around because I'm about to share everything I wish someone had told me a decade ago. Back then, I had no clue I had anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, or ADHD. Fast forward to today, after graduating in medicine and diving into neuroscience for 9 years, starting with my time in the Science Without Borders program at UC Berkeley, I've picked up a mix of theory and real-world insights that can really help. For those who don't know me, I'm not exactly a social butterfly. I wasn't born super confident or anything. I actually had to train my brain to pick up social skills, and it was only recently that I found out I also have autism, diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. When we talk about autism these days, it's important to remember it's a pretty broad spectrum. Back in the day, people mostly thought of autism as something that only affected nonverbal individuals, but now we know better. There's this thing called Asperger's syndrome, which has been recognized for a while, but is now part of the autism spectrum. It's where someone has a tough time picking up on social cues, way more common than you might think, and they might struggle with reading facial expressions or body language. I've been there myself, dealing with all these challenges without really knowing what was up. It felt like I was stuck in my own personal hell, constantly overthinking, battling social and relationship issues, and even getting into some substance stuff. But anyway, let's dive into it. Stay with me here. I'm going to break down why anxiety is so often linked to ADHD, attention deficit, hyperactivity, and depression, which are the usual suspects when it comes to ADHD comorbidities. To give you some perspective, about 40% of people with ADHD also deal with anxiety, and roughly 30% struggle with depression. But why is that, you ask? Well, with ADHD, there's usually a lack of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, making it tough for someone with ADHD to focus and finish tasks. This can lead to procrastination, and you guessed it, rumination. Two big players in anxiety and depression. So yeah, ADHD is closely tied to anxiety and depression. And when it comes to diagnosing ADHD, it's got to be done with a look back at childhood. It's not something you can just spot in someone walking down the street because they seem distracted. Plus, you can't rely only on symptoms because a lot of what looks like ADHD might actually be due to things like not getting enough sleep, poor diet, or not moving around enough. All things that can mimic ADHD symptoms. As we dive into this topic, I want to let you know I've included a list of 4 incredible books in the video description that can really help you on your personal development journey. These books have had a big impact on me, and I think they'll resonate with what we're about to discuss. So if you're looking to go deeper, be sure to check them out after the video. ADHD diagnosis really needs that backward glance to childhood. Can't just look at the present. I remember my own childhood where I was constantly distracted, had trouble following rules, and school, well, let's just say it wasn't a breeze. But here's the twist. I grew up in an environment that pushed me to study, and I actually got into math, which, looking back, ties into that hyperfocus that's often seen in ADHD. Funny enough, hyperfocus also shows up in autism, so there's that overlap. But let me tell you, a diagnosis is just that, a label. It's not something to obsess over. Too many people do, thinking, oh, I've got ADHD, so that's my excuse for not doing anything. Or they lean on medication like it's a magic fix without tackling what's really going on beneath the surface, which doesn't solve a thing. Because here's the deal, dopamine is never free. You always pay for it. Medication might help in certain situations like ADHD meds, but they won't get to the root of the problem. What really makes a difference are neuroscience-based strategies, essentially how you and your environment interact. And let me tell you, that's 80% of the solution right there. Back to my childhood, I already had this feeling something was off. I'd spend some recesses alone, struggled with socializing, and yeah, I was impulsive. But overall, I was a pretty happy kid. Impulsivity is super common with ADHD, but then adolescence hit and bam, my ADHD spiraled into brutal anxiety. One big reason, which I had no clue about back then, was that I was watching porn without realizing it was harmful. It was even encouraged, you know? For those who don't know, the real danger of porn lies in how incredibly addictive it is, thanks to 3 main factors: unlimited novelty, easy access, and instant gratification without any effort. If you've got ADHD, you've got to watch out for those intense pleasures because there's a higher risk of addictive behaviors, including substance abuse. So, I was watching porn and I remember having a panic attack when I was 15. The doctor I saw at the time was so clueless that the whole thing left me traumatized. They thought something was really wrong with me because my blood pressure was 150 over 100, but that's just anxiety for you. It causes vasoconstriction, puts your body in fight or flight mode, and your blood pressure shoots up. They started poking around my heart, running all these cardiac tests, sticking me with a Holter monitor, and thank God everything was fine. But man, I was completely traumatized by the whole hospital experience. It was awful. Then at 16, things took another nosedive. I got into a relationship because of social pressure. There was all this pressure to lose your virginity ASAP, get into relationships, and all that jazz. Kind of like the pressure around porn. It's that same mindset of, oh, everyone's doing it, so I might as well too. It's normal to eat junk food, so I'll eat it. It's normal to drink, so I'll drink. It's normal to smoke, so I'll smoke. You get sucked into it, and before I knew it, I was in a relationship for 2.5 years, and I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I didn't know who I was. That period was like living in hell. My teenage years, from 14 to 16, even up to 19, were just awful. I remember that during that time, I was studying civil engineering at UNB. I didn't even want to study that, but I was in this school where the pressure was insane. You were just a number. So I ended up studying something I didn't even want to do, just to switch paths later. What really flipped the script for me was getting into the Science Without Borders program, which was a government initiative back then. While I was studying civil engineering, I got the chance to head over to the University of California in Berkeley. Now, here's the cool part. Even though I was focused on civil engineering, I had to pick up some other courses, and that's when I stumbled into neuroscience. It was like a light bulb moment. I started piecing together what was going on with me, realizing that anxiety was a big part of it, and here's the kicker. You can actually train your brain. Crazy, right? No one ever tells you this, but your brain, your thoughts, your entire mindset, you can train it. By building a behavioral repertoire, you can show yourself that you've got what it takes. For me, that's the only real way to build confidence, by stacking up actual evidence that you're capable. So how do you do this? Through gradual exposure. Like, I used to be terrified of just walking up to someone on the street to chat, especially if it was someone I found attractive. But why was I so scared? It all boiled down to that mindset I picked up from watching porn, thinking I needed to get something out of the interaction, taking something for myself. That's what society drills into us from a young age, right? That whole Hollywood men get lucky narrative. But when you flip the script to focus on delivering value instead, talking to someone on the street becomes no big deal. What's so scary about that, right? So yeah, I started building up this behavioral repertoire. I remember being super lost at one point. I was about to graduate in civil engineering from UNB, had some issues with cannabis and even alcohol. Though I've cut that out completely now because, let's face it, alcohol is a toxin. There's no safe dose. The thing with cannabis, especially if you're under 25, is that your brain's still developing, still myelinating. Smoking cannabis can seriously hike up your risk of schizophrenia. It amplifies everything. So if you're stuck in a loop of negative thoughts, it can tip you into paranoia, which is why the schizophrenia risk is no joke, especially if you're smoking. And smoking in general is just awful, particularly tobacco. Tobacco is a major carcinogen. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend smoking anything, but there are certain cases, even in autism, where THC and CBD from cannabis can actually be helpful, though smoking is never the answer. When you smoke, the absorption is lightning fast, totally different from eating oil or using it therapeutically in other ways. Now, if you've got ADHD, you probably know how easy it is to lose the thread when you're telling a story. Neurodivergent brains kind of work like that. The upside is that you get to tap into more lateral thinking. Your mind can roam to the extremes. But the downside? That same capacity for deep abstraction can lead you to ruminate endlessly, spiraling into existential reflections and social issues because you're overthinking everything. So yeah, back in my 20s, I was caught up in using substances, not even realizing how much damage they were doing because, well, everyone else was doing it. So I just followed along. My diet wasn't great either. I ended up dropping out of medicine, moved to Los Angeles for a stint, working an internship at a construction company. But I don't want to drag on too much. I want this to be as helpful as possible for you. There was this period when I was really trying to kick the porn habit. I knew it was doing me no good, but man, it was tough to let go. At the same time, I wanted to start making videos, creating content, but I was so ashamed to even get in front of a camera. That fear, totally tied to perfectionism and those ruminating thoughts, constantly overthinking, harshly judging myself, and honestly, judging others too. It's like being trapped in your own head. Funny thing is, I saw 2 psychiatrists who specialized in ADHD, and they both told me I had to take Vyvanse every single day, weekends included. My new identity was basically supposed to be Mr. Vyvanse, so I started taking it, but here's where it went sideways. Vyvanse messes with your sleep. And sleep, it's like the cornerstone for emotional processing. Mess up your sleep and your anxiety's gonna spike, no doubt. But I couldn't get to the root cause of my ADHD. I was just stuck in this vicious cycle. I remember around that time, I was in a relationship and it was a total mess. I got even more impulsive, chasing after immediate pleasures. I ended up pushing the person away. And that's when it hit me. When something really matters to you, the more you stand to lose, the bigger the cognitive restructuring that happens. The bigger the sacrifice, the more you can change. I use that as fuel to turn my life around. At first, my motivation might have come from wanting to prove something to others, to light that fire for change. So I committed to 90 days without any sexual stimuli just to see what would happen. Around day 100, I started recording videos and haven't looked back since. Of course, I slipped up. I'm not sitting here claiming to have gone 2 years without any sexual stimuli, but it's good to be aware and to take those breaks when needed. I did a dopamine detox, steering clear of the activities that triggered the biggest dopamine spikes for me. Maybe it's different for you, maybe food's your thing, I don't know. But when you do a dopamine detox, it helps to stabilize your dopamine levels, giving you more consistent dopamine tone, which means you can focus better and actually get stuff done because the simple things start to feel more rewarding. You're not stuck in this loop of constantly chasing that next dopamine hit, that next high. This makes a huge difference if you've got ADHD. Besides sleep, you really need discipline, though it's tough. The idea is to find the dopamine in the process, not just in the result. When you're focused on phasic dopamine, you're too fixated on the outcome, always chasing that end goal. This can also push people away because in relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, if you're obsessed with the outcome, you end up behaving in a way that's more dependent and less enjoyable for the other person. It's a lose-lose situation. So focus on the process. Do things because you genuinely enjoy them, because you're doing them for yourself. I eventually stopped taking Vyvanse and decided to go it alone. I started making videos, and I remember in my med school class, a lot of people started judging me because I was putting myself out there. Suddenly, I was in the spotlight. So any little mistake I made in the hospital got blown way out of proportion. It's normal, though. People do get jealous, and we've got these neural instincts that make us want to talk bad about others, to gang up on someone. It gives you this quick hit of relief, a sense of comfort, instead of motivating yourself to take action and use it as inspiration. But a lot of people are just acting out of spite. That's interesting too. Loving your enemy, loving everyone. Once you realize that people are acting based on their own traumas and insecurities, you stop blaming them, and life gets a whole lot easier. Your emotional regulation gets way better, you stress less, and that even has a ripple effect on your health, inflammation, and how long you live. Stress responses, cortisol, inflammation, they're all tied to your immune system. So yeah, a bunch of different diseases, not just your average cold, can be influenced by how well your immune system is functioning. One thing that's really been helping me lately on this journey is spiritual practice. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what religion you follow. It's more about the practice itself, if you can swing it. There's a ton of research out there now with solid evidence showing the benefits of spiritual practices, whether it's prayer, meditation, or just practicing gratitude. These kinds of practices help strengthen neural pathways tied to gratitude and cut down on rumination. That's how I've been training myself, slowly but surely, over the years. It's a long process where you're basically teaching your mind to focus on the positive stuff. Practicing gratitude is something you can do at any moment. Just take a second to think about your family or someone you care about or anything good in your life. I'm sure there's something. By reinforcing these pathways, you actually boost your social cognition and empathy, which are often areas where folks with socialization problems and ADHD struggle. As you keep reinforcing these circuits, you'll start feeling better, and gradually you're training your brain to recognize and embrace love more. At the end of the day, it's all about love, right? The more you remember that we're all connected and act out of love, the better your life's going to get. Your quality of life will skyrocket, and it's a win-win all around. You'll feel a lot better, connect with people more effectively, and others will notice the change. You'll make a bigger impact and fit into the world better. We often forget to train these cognitive circuits, but they're actually super trainable, way more than you might think. Don't get stuck on a diagnosis. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, I have ADHD, or I have anxiety, or I have depression, and there's no way out. That whole idea that there's no cure, it's a huge problem, because if you start taking steps, training your mind and tweaking your environment, you can reduce the symptoms of ADHD or depression. Technically, you don't fit that diagnosis anymore. So maybe there is a cure. I don't get why they say there isn't. I've read psychiatry textbooks cover to cover, and I still don't understand why they claim depression can't be cured. Another interesting point. Creativity can be the cure for chronic consumption. For those of us with ADHD, working creatively is a game changer because of our lateral thinking and neurodivergence. The problem is we're living in this era of nonstop chronic consumption. Your attention span is under constant attack from short videos and all sorts of distractions. But when you start using social media to create, to inspire yourself to make something, you're channeling dopamine into the process, not just the outcome. This is cognitive training too. Think of your brain like a muscle. Whatever you feed your brain will trigger some kind of response. So that's my story. I'm trying to share it in a way that's useful for you. I don't want to get bogged down in too many details, because here's the truth. When someone's watching a video, they want to know what's in it for them. No one really cares about you or me. Let's be real. So yeah, my story might be interesting, but what can I offer you? If I can share it in a way that's practical and applicable, that's what makes the difference. That's what I'm aiming to do here. But just remember, I'm not perfect. I've still got a lot to learn, a lot of cognitive training to go through. It's a lifelong process, honestly. I don't think it ever really ends. And that's something a lot of coaches tend to gloss over. Thank God I'm not a coach, no offense to coaches, but it's tough because there's often a lack of a solid foundation. It's like they act as if everything happens overnight, and there's also this disconnect from social reality, especially with those big name millionaire coaches. It's usually pretty complicated to talk about some of these issues, like just going out there and doing it. Anyway, I think I lost my train of thought there, but that's the gist. I'm trying to bring these ideas to you in a way that's practical and useful. I've been meaning to make a video on ADHD for a while, so maybe I'll do that soon. But for now, that's it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.